Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Katie Sacra, and I will be your host for tonight's GFPD Hopeful Hearts webinar, Mental Health Support and Hope for Families. We are excited and grateful to have partnered with Hearts Connected to help you navigate these challenging topics tonight. We will be answering questions at the end, but you can go ahead and submit your questions at any time during the webinar. We did have a change in presenters, so I'd really like to thank Caitlin Kalashewski, a certified child life specialist, for being with us tonight and making sure this important information is shared with our community. Caitlin has over a decade of experience in both education and healthcare within the USA and internationally. She has a degree in psychology and special education with specialized endorsements in working with children with learning disabilities and emotional impairments. In addition, she earned a Master of Education from Grand Valley State University. Previously, she was a special education teacher as well as an early intervention specialist at both the elementary and high school levels. Caitlin has served patients and families in both inpatient and outpatient healthcare settings, as well as providing community-based services. She has worked in hospitals in Arizona and Hawaii, and has also activated child life services and programming in a new Women and Children's Center overseas. During the summer, she also serves as a child life student preceptor in Cape Town, South Africa. Caitlin, thank you again for being here with us tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Katie, for that introduction. And thank you for letting Hearts Connected work with GFPD. And it's an honor to be here tonight speaking to this community. And thank you for this opportunity and this time. Like Katie said, my name is Caitlin Kalashewski. I am one of the child life specialists that works for Hearts Connected. So Hearts Connected, just to give you just a brief overview of who I am and what we do and this partnership. So we are a team of child development experts located all over the US, and we provide all virtual supports. We support children, teens, and their families facing difficult situations and just the general life stressors and different life transitions that families go through. So we do not have wait lists. Essentially, we are available 24 hours, 7 days a week, and we can see families as quickly as within a 24-hour time frame. And we do everything, like I said, virtually. So we do phone and video visits with both children and also with family members. So we support caregivers as well through education and emotional support and coaching and mentoring. You are able to book a free 15-minute consult on our website at any time. During this consult, this is the opportunity for parents or caregivers to speak one-on-one with a certified specialist about their family's needs, learn a little bit more about our services, maybe what's needed for their child, their family, and for us to gain more information about the situation or circumstance. So we offer at Hearts Connected education, resources, information, both on our social media outlets, but also on our website directly. And Hearts Connected also hosts a monthly grief webinar that I will discuss a little bit more about later. Hearts Connected as a service, it was developed by a pediatric nurse, actually, of about 30 or so years, who saw this value and this need outside of the typical healthcare environment and wanted to make these services readily available to families beyond the hospital walls, because what happens when they get discharged? Life still happens, right? So she essentially saw the gap in care for these families accessing these services. So it's really exciting to be a part of Hearts Connected and also offer things in the community such as this webinar today. So a little bit about what child life is and what we do. I'm aware that some of you may already be in the know of child life and maybe even have worked with child life previously. But for some of you, child life may be a new term and a new profession. What is child life? As a brief overview, we focus on three main things from a high level, let's just say: education, coping, and play. So we provide education to children in a developmentally appropriate way that the child will understand. And we do that through a lot of different means, whether it's through play, through reading, through conversations and discussions, through therapeutic art activities, and different life circumstances like chronic diagnosis, a caregiver being deployed, divorce, move or school change, etc. We can provide all sorts of different education and supports regarding all different life circumstances. In regard to that play piece, we provide play in a lot of different ways and for a lot of different reasons. So it can be normative play, therapeutic play, medical play, because we know that play is how children learn. Play is the work of children. It's how they explore and it's how they understand and express what they're feeling, their misconceptions, what they understand or don't understand about a situation. And it really gives children a sense of control and the ability to process what's happening in their life and what's going on around them. So it's not only powerful, but it's therapeutic when children can play out circumstances, experiences, conversations of traumatic events, anything that's going on in their life, they can essentially play it out if they want to. So while we are playing with children, we're intentionally observing and watching and assessing what they are doing and saying to help us tailor services to meet children where they are individually. And then finally, in regards to what we do from a coping perspective, we are assessing their coping, but we're also teaching these children coping skills to process their emotions and experience and build a coping skill. I like to call it like a toolkit to help them build resiliency and be able to pull different tools out of pending the circumstance and situation. So it's helping them process current or past experiences and traumas and being able to work through them. Our goal is to help children learn to identify and essentially share their levels of pain and be able to actually express pain in a way that is appropriate for a child. Because we know as adults, we can express pain verbally, but children can't do that the same way we do. And it's helping them to manage their pain, whether it's chronic or acute, not only with pharmacological medications, but also from a non-pharmacological pain management standpoint and support measures. Also learning ways to relax their bodies and regulate their nervous systems and manage their pain in that way. And additionally, like it says with resources, we know that connection is important for all humans, and connecting them to peer groups to help decrease that feeling they might have of isolation, provide families and older children like teenagers with resources and education, pamphlets, information, camps, and just that level of connection. We have access to a lot of resources, whether it be for a new diagnosis, compliance, sibling support, coping, grief and loss. The list really does go on. And it's important for families to continue having access to these things beyond their, medical appointment, beyond seeing the doctor, beyond being in the hospital. Families have the right to have access to these things basically at their fingertips at all times, because that's when life happens too. It's outside of the doctor's office and it's outside of the hospital. So let's talk a bit about what we would do to explain a complex diagnosis. And obviously, peroxisomal disorders is a complex diagnosis. So when I go through explaining what I would do, I'm obviously taking it from a child life specialist standpoint. But when I share this information and kind of this process or so, I'll call it, know that this is also a way that families, caregivers, parents, grandparents, whomever can use the same exact, we hope for them to use this same type of approach and these same type of steps when it comes to explaining to the siblings what is going on and what this diagnosis means and how to approach those conversations and how to approach working and talking through this with the other children. So as it states on this slide, first I ask questions to understand what that brother or sister already knows. Questions also support getting clarity around what their misconceptions might be, what they may be fearful of, or do they feel comfortable and knowledgeable already? And maybe they don't actually need as much in-depth information or support or conversations. And when I say ask questions, I don't mean that this has to be a super formal, sit down Q&A with your 5-year-old, right? It can be very much child-friendly and child-led. And it can be through something like play, like for your younger kids, for example, giving them the teddy bear or one of their comfort items and being like, hey, Teddy told me he noticed that your brother was going to the doctors a lot lately or sleeping a lot lately, and he wants to know what's happening. Do you know what's happening? Could you help and answer Teddy's questions? Like even something like that, like almost making it a playful event so it doesn't feel like such a formal Q&A time. So after you ask those questions, know that being honest in your explanation is crucial and it is imperative. It builds trust and comfort. And we recognize it can be extremely difficult, and the complexity and the tragedy of it potentially is there. And we're not trying to dismiss that by any means. And we recognize it can be a potentially stressful or even maybe uncomfortable conversation, especially for adults even. But be honest and use clear, concrete language about what this disorder is and what it means and what it looks like, and what implications are of it. Use words that those brothers or sisters will hear, whether it's from other adults, whether it's from medical providers, whether it's between you and other people you're speaking to. Use those same words that they're going to hear, because I promise you that they're listening. They might pretend like they're not by sitting on their iPads or something, but they're still hearing those words being said. So we want those same concrete, clear words used when you're explaining a diagnosis like of this nature to them, because we want to avoid confusion and we don't want to create a sense of distrust with the child. And we don't want to make something sound better than it is or easier than it is, because we want to be a trustworthy person, right? You want your child to trust you and believe what you say, because you want them to continue coming to you for support and questions and guidance and that sense of safety. And that will happen if they know that you were honest with them. The third thing listed is using developmentally appropriate language. Now, I recognize that as a trained certified child life specialist, I have a lot of experience in determining, what appropriate language looks like and sounds like for this diagnosis for a 2-year-old sibling versus, let's say, a 15-year-old, right? And how it will look and sound very different in regards to what words I'm using and what is developmentally appropriate. And we know you as the parent or caregiver don't necessarily have all of the information, and you are likely not a healthcare professional, right? And you don't have to be, and that is okay. Keep it simple, keep it honest, and keep it concrete as they're younger, and add additional imperative information and vocabulary as they grow up. And if you have any specific questions as to maybe what this would exactly sound like or look like for your family and your additional needs, know that I would love questions, and we can take time at the end to address some very specific scenarios to navigate that conversation. The fourth bullet point there, validating emotions. This is so important. We want to validate their emotions and what they're actually experiencing and feeling. Those children, those brothers or sisters, they may feel totally fine talking to someone, or they may be really scared and worried, and you can address those feelings and validate them, that it's okay to have them. And those are normal responses. Those are normal feelings. Children have those feelings and adults have those feelings. And your child may actually feel relief to finally have answers and know what's happening and have their experience and their emotions be validated verbally like that. And many times their emotions may actually surprise you. So we want to validate them and not make them feel badly for feeling that way or ashamed for what they're feeling. We don't want them to feel isolated or feelings of being different or having different feelings. We want them to feel safe and okay to share those emotions with you or with trusted adults in general. And it's okay for our feelings and emotions to change with time. And that's normal too, especially when it comes to a complex diagnosis. And finally, we want to make sure that there's follow-up support. We don't want to just provide explanations of this complex diagnosis and think of it as a one-time conversation and, okay, check that off the list and now we're done. Because the reality is one conversation is not enough. And follow-up does matter because questions can arise with time, emotions can change, new fears can develop, and we want to reassess and evaluate their needs and where they're at that time. And we want to show up and lean into those new fears and emotions and not back away from them out of stress or out of worry as an adult. I always like to say fear is not a bad thing. It's a normal reaction to something complex or scary. So whether it's the next day or a week after this initial conversation, or whenever it might be that you know is best for your child or children and your family, please be sure to provide that space and that time for follow-up support, for additional conversations. It can be something as simple as an opener, such as, how did it feel to talk to me about your brother or sister's diagnosis? Or I wonder how you were feeling when you went to bed after our conversation. Or depending on their age, I wonder if any of your friends have ever asked you about your brother or sister. Have they? How did that make you feel? What did you end up saying to them when they asked? Those are kind of open-ended questions where it really then becomes a space for that child then to lead that conversation. And that gives you more guidance if you're unsure as to well, how do I follow up? What do I say? What's needed to say? If you put the ball in their court, so to speak, their response to those open-ended questions are really going to help guide you and probably actually ease your potential stressors in that conversation too. The next slide, preparation for end of life. If you have a child at home that is approaching an end of life situation, or maybe they're in hospice care and we don't know how much longer that they have with us here on earth, how do we possibly prepare the siblings, or maybe it's the cousins or neighbors or all these people who dearly love your child as well? I found in my practice, and this is echoed across most specialists or all specialists that I know, even in personal life experiences, is that a lot of people wait until after death to talk about it because they want to avoid anticipatory stressors or anxiety, and they want to shield their children from it. But the reality is that it's happening. And whether we say it out loud or not, those feelings, those questions, those thoughts that those children are having, those fears, and their overall just general grief is taking place within their heart and within their soul. And they just might not be talking about it, especially if they aren't given the space to do so. So it's important that we talk to them about it and that we create this open dialogue and these safe spaces for our children so we can assess their emotions and understandings and address misconceptions and truly meet them where they are in their grief process and in their processing in general. So especially in these difficult situations when a death hasn't happened yet, it can be really, really hard for a caregiver to say out loud what is to come. Giving your child this honesty really invites them into this process a bit more so they know what to expect to some degree and they can receive support through that process. When we keep kids in the dark, we think we're protecting them. But in reality, what we're doing is isolating them further from the experience, and we're not giving them opportunities to be supported along the way and to appropriately respond to what is happening. If we isolate children and try to protect them by means of not sharing fully or disclosing fully, those children are going to experience this traumatic experience and heartbreak and grief regardless, because no matter how much we try to shield, they're still going to hear conversations, they're still going to see tears, they're still going to see their family going through something really hard. And so if we just leave them out of it, we're actually making them experience another type of trauma and another issue that can be potentially mitigated if we just were honest and explained to them up front in regards to what was happening and giving them truthful, honest information. So as much as caregivers think they're protecting their children, they're potentially actually causing another stressor and another trauma by not giving this honest information. Because like I said, those children are going to experience it. So by not giving them honesty, what that's doing is causing trauma potentially from a standpoint of, I was lied to, why didn't mama tell me? Or why didn't daddy explain that to me? Or that's not what they told me was going to happen. They said this was going to happen. Or they told me this, or I heard this, right? So that's another form of trauma that those children will essentially go through. And we want to avoid that as much as possible, of course. So we want to be honest. If a child comes to you and they ask let's say a very specific question, like, is my sister dying? We, of course, don't know a specific timeline, but some clear language that we can use in a situation with a question such as that's very direct and very specific. We can say something like, yes, we don't know when and we don't know how long, but your sister's body is very sick and it's not getting better. And sometimes when bodies get very sick like that and they don't get better, the body does die eventually. And you can leave it at that. It doesn't have to be medically complex. It can be simple but honest. And I absolutely recognize that this may sound really difficult or maybe even harsh or very to the point and even hard to hear out loud someone say something like that. But using the honest and sincere and concrete language allows the child to actually process what you said, ask questions. It gives them time to let it actually sit in or sink in, right? And it may bring up a lot of sadness, fear, maybe even confusion. All of these are normal responses to what's happening, and they're expected, actually. And this allows for you as a caregiver or parent to show up for that child then and step in and provide them the supports that they need based on what they express to you after hearing that information. So you're actually able to support them in a better, more individualized way when they have honest information. And the second part of preparing for an end-of-life situation is inclusion. We want to include brothers and sisters. Inclusion is so important because a lot of siblings feel pushed aside because they weren't invited into this information or this process as a whole for their family. Maybe their family wanted to protect them, or they didn't think that they were old enough to understand, or didn't know what to say or do for the sibling. Or maybe they thought, well, what does giving choices to the brother or sister matter? Like, they won't even understand the repercussions of those decisions or choices, such as like going to a funeral or not. But certain decisions, like going to a funeral, potentially writing a letter or drawing something for their brother or sister, staying at bedside during final goodbyes, we may question, is my child ready for that or old enough to make that type of decision? The reality is no one is technically old enough or ready to handle those decisions or those situations. Even adults were not. They're terribly hard for anyone and for everyone, regardless of the age, regardless of the circumstance. We don't want to be in that situation or experience that, and we want to protect our children from it. But if we push them away from it, we aren't inviting them into this process that the whole family is experiencing. So we want to include them by asking them what they want to be a part of. How might they want this to look for them and their relationship specifically with their brother or sister? How might they want to say goodbye? What does that look like for them? I do this with children in my practice as young as 2 years old, giving them choices as to different options that they could have or do. Now, maybe they can't come up with those options as a 2-year-old or as a toddler in general themselves. That's where we're tailoring it to their needs developmentally. Do you want to do X or Y for your brother, right? Do you want to go to this or not go to this? You might have to explain those more with the younger children, of course. They might not know the gravity or the extent to what something means or what their decisions are and how their choices matter, and not only for the short term, but for the long run. And so it's really important to give them that information and give them those explanations that are honest. Again, everything comes back to honesty. And this is really powerful for a child when something big and hard is happening, to be included and have choices and have a say in how they want to proceed with the situation that they wish wasn't happening at all. Choices matter, and they do make a difference with someone's coping, even for a young kiddo like a toddler. And third, we want to clear up misconceptions. So whenever we are anticipating death or something difficult to come, a lot of anxiety and fear and anticipation is going on, and kids pick up on that. They pick up on so much more than we give them credit for, I think. And with that being said, we want to clear up those misconceptions, whether it's about mortality, about something happening tomorrow to their sister versus 6 months from now, or 10 years from now, or maybe even it's about your mortality because they start to question a lot of things and want to know all these answers. It's just really important that the more information we know about what they understand and where their misconceptions are, that gives you the opening and the green light to then address those misconceptions and clear them up for the child. Children will always think something is worse than it actually is, and they go to worst case scenarios across the board when it comes to painful things, difficult things, stressful things. So we can lessen that for them if we clear up those misconceptions. And lastly, creating special moments. So we want to create special moments to give siblings and friends, neighbors, people who love your child opportunities to share just how much they love them and to receive love from their sibling who is passing and to do what they want to do to find some sense of connection beyond life here. How can they do certain things now, to be able to maintain a connection later when their body is not with us? So special moments they can of course vary, but they can be as simple as writing a letter, having an ice cream party, in the bedroom, having a family movie night, a family photo shoot, whatever it might be that offers your child a sense of choice, but also what is special for your child. So we don't want to ever assume, of course, what your child might think is special. And it might even vary between if there's multiple siblings, each child might think something different is special, and that's okay. They should each have the opportunity to create those special moments and memories in a way that is special to them and for them during this process for them as siblings. So for bereavement support, it is very similar to preparing for a death that is happening and that preparation slide that we just went over. However, this response is going to be a little bit different because the death has happened. Again, we want to be honest and help them understand the permanency and, what does death mean, in using concrete language like died and dead. We don't want to use metaphors like gone to sleep or going away or passed away. Those are very confusing for a child who is still building an understanding of what life and death is and who is still building a vocabulary. Metaphors just in general are just very, very confusing, especially for younger children, your toddlers, your preschool age children, and even your younger school age children. So when it comes to bereavement support, I wanted to let you know, we do have at Hearts Connected a 1-hour webinar on bereavement support that we offer monthly that goes into much greater detail on specifically words and phrases and things we say to a child based on their cognitive understanding. So, what does a 2-year-old know about death and dying, and how do we respond to that versus what does a 6-year-old know and how do we respond to them? And helping caregivers have a greater understanding of what their child knows and doesn't know yet about death, so that where to step in and provide those supports to them. And I am happy to share this information and send you our webinar, Healing Hearts, that is focused on this bereavement support, if that is of interest to anyone, if it becomes necessary, and if it would be helpful for your family and your home. So for bereavement support, like I said, similar in regards to that honesty, of course, being honest and helping them understand permanency, and also that clear, concrete language. Like I was saying, we don't want to use language that has multiple meanings, like going away. When a young child hears their parents refer to going away, that can mean a lot of things. Like my mom or my dad goes away to go to the grocery store, but then they come back in an hour and I see them again. This isn't permanent. So it can become very confusing when you're saying things like going away, and they then become terrified of what they identified as what going away is now. And now it's anytime someone leaves and never comes back, right? We don't want them to become fearful of people temporarily going away. We want them to build an understanding of permanency and that death is something that is permanent. And they sadly would not be able to see their brothers and sisters' body again in that same capacity. And although that this sounds harsh, this creates a space for them to respond appropriately to what is happening, and for us as adults to step in and support them further based on the reality and what that child is going through. And we want to give them permission to grieve. This may or may not be this child's first experience of death. And it doesn't always have to be human death. It can be the grief. Maybe they've grieved a pet, the loss of a pet before, and that's very, very hard for children too. Grief is grief. And so they may be very confused by all these feelings, whether because they've experienced grief already and this one is different, or they've maybe never experienced grief before. And they maybe don't want to express themselves, or they don't know how to express themselves, or maybe they're trying to hold it in because they don't want to hurt their mom or dad more because, they've already seen their mom or dad crying so much, for example. So they're just going to, repress their own feelings because they don't want to add to the hurt or the pain or the tears. So sometimes we literally need to give them this permission and sit down with that child or children and recognize those emotions that they're showing and tell them it's okay. It's okay to be sad. I really miss your brother too. It's okay to feel this way. I love you and I'm here for you while you're feeling sad. Normalize their feelings. You have them too as adults, and, give them almost that verbal permission. Like, think of it as verbal permission to grieve. And outside of verbal permission can also look like you as a caregiver, not shying away from your grief in front of your other children. Outwardly grieving yourself tells the child that that is a healthy, normal response, and that they can do the same thing too. This is a safe home, a safe environment to grieve, to cry, to say things like, I'm sad. I really miss Sissy. I'm really hurting right now. Let them see what grief looks like. Let them see what grief sounds like, and that it's normal. And give them that space to feel safe to grieve with you and around you. Preparation for returning to school. So bereavement support is also really important in the school setting for school age kiddos and your teenagers. A lot of their grief will show up naturally just because of the time spent in school during the week. It will show up in the school setting more than likely. And so, let the school know what to expect about your child's response to grief and what's been happening and what support your child might need in place, and, how your child is currently coping and what is their current response looking like and sounding like at home that you're expecting will translate to school as well. Are you worried about performance changes? Your child now being withdrawn, maybe a perfectionist tendency and a sense of control over, or, hypervigilancy over the schoolwork. It can look and manifest in a lot of different ways. So prepare the teachers to have an eye out for those behaviors and any, potential changes and responses. And then I do want to add in that for older kids, like your teenagers, it is important to prepare them individually for going back to school and being around their peers, because more than likely their peers know to some extent what's been happening or what is going on. And bless their hearts, teenagers don't always empathize in a way that is appropriate. And they may have good intentions, but they may not say it the right way, or in an empathetic way, or an understanding way, or a tactful way, right? So practice responses with your teen as to how they're going to respond to comments and questions from their peers that maybe catches them off guard or brings them anxiety when they get asked it, right? And it's a great opportunity to teach your child boundaries, like, I don't really feel comfortable talking about it right now, or I just don't want to share that right now. Boundary setting is a really important life skill. So it can be tied into those conversations. Because at the end of the day, your child, your teen does not have to answer questions if they don't want to, especially in an environment if they're not feeling like they're safe to express themselves and be vulnerable, especially in front of their peers. Let them know it's okay to say those things. Like, I don't want to talk about it right now. I don't want to share at this time. And then lastly, maintaining connection. So it's important to help a child find ways to maintain connections. And this can be a lot of different ways. And again, this is something that gets individualized based on what that child is expressing and their desires, and taking their needs into consideration. So this could be a memory making activity, helping them come up with something that's special to them, that they had with this child and they want to continue doing, a routine that they had that maybe can just be modified in some capacity, doing something even when that child is no longer with us, with their body. Do they want to write letters even after their body is not with us? Whatever that looks like to that child, even though they're not physically here, they can still continue a relationship and maintain a connection. We just know that connection just has to look a little bit different. And this is so powerful for someone who's grieving the loss of someone so important to them, to still maintain a connection that feels comfortable and right to them and important and meaningful to them. This also creates space for grief to remain present and express themselves versus dismissing it, right? We don't want them to be dismissing grief and acting like it didn't exist and brushing it off. We know that there's a lot of repercussions with that, right? So this is obviously very, very high level, barely touched the surface. And there's, of course, a lot more to be said and a lot more dialogue around this conversation and around bereavement supports that I'm not able to share in this time frame. So if you do have questions or you feel like you need more support based on just this little bit that I shared, know that there are resources and there's supports available. And I do recognize that this is barely touching the surface of the needs for this complex conversation. Okay, so this is something that I get asked a lot, and it is absolutely a valid question. And that's the first thing I always do when parents come to me with like, oh my goodness, like, how do I answer these questions? Like, these are big questions. These are hard questions. And absolutely, those are hard questions. There's so many big, hard questions that children of all ages, you'd be surprised, can come up with. Even 3-year-olds can come up with really big, hard questions that can throw you off as a parent. That might even surprise you that they're even thinking that way, right? Or can come up with that kind of question. So how do we respond as adults and as caregivers to these big questions? And I don't even use this acknowledge, affirm, ask questions, be there. I don't even use this approach just for complex medical diagnosis. I use this for all different difficult life circumstances, whether it's, school bullying and school shootings, divorces, deployment, regardless of the difficult circumstance. This is an approach to use when you're responding to a child's really big questions. So I put on the bottom two, I don't know if you can read it. There is a great book Dr. Lauren Starnes wrote that's out called Big Conversations with Little Children, where she actually focuses on these 4 main ways to respond. Again, acknowledging, affirming, asking questions, and being there. So I will briefly touch on this process and talk to these 4 steps, but feel free to check out that book if it interests you. It may be of benefit, or if you just want further information and dialogue around this specific topic, it's a great starting point. So the first step, acknowledging. The first thing when a child comes to you, regardless of their age or regardless of the question, when they come to you with a big question and you don't know how to respond, we don't want to shame them or make them feel bad for asking that question or ignore them. I think that's the biggest one I see, is just ignoring. We want to acknowledge that they asked the question. Hey, I heard your question. Or, maybe for example, you're at the grocery store and it's loud, it's chaotic, it's a stressful environment, and your child comes to you, taps you on the hip, on the back, and says, why is this happening? Why our family? Or maybe something really emotional, like, why did Sissy die? And you're thinking, like, where is this coming from? I don't want to answer this right now. This is going to bring up emotions for me. I'm trying to check out of the grocery store. I only have two hands. I can only do so much, right? So instead of dismissing the question, we want to acknowledge it. Hey, I heard you ask about your sister. And then we can move to the second step and affirm that it's okay that they asked you that question, even though you might not want to respond to it right now, or maybe you actually can't respond in that moment. We don't want to ever shame them for asking us those questions. The child was able to ask you that because they trusted you. And if we dismiss them or shame them for asking us, or make them feel bad for asking us those questions, now they're not going to feel like they can ask questions in the future. And we don't want that. So we want to acknowledge and affirm it. Hey, I heard you ask about your sister. I'm so thankful that you asked me that, but right now we're checking out our groceries. But how about once we get back in the car, I can answer your question, right? That's acknowledging that the question was asked and you heard them, and it's affirming that that question matters and you want to respond to them and you plan to. You just can't do it this exact second. That's okay. The reality is you can't always answer a question right then and there in life, but you can still acknowledge and affirm it and give them a response as to when you will hope to or attempt to answer their question, right? So after affirming it, and you're ready to respond and approach this big question, the best step to take is actually asking them questions. So once we feel like we have the space and we are comfortable, we can be present. We can answer their question first with a question to them. Like, I'm wondering, why did you ask me about your sister just then? Did something make you think of your sister? Did you maybe see someone that looked like your sister? Right? We want to ask them these questions first to see where this question or thought is coming from. And that can actually, again, help us figure out how to transition and how to answer and how to navigate this conversation beyond this question. And then lastly, be there. Just be present and be available to your child while they're processing your answer and response to that big question. They might not have a lot to say afterwards, especially for certain ages or certain questions and responses. They might be silent. Hold space and time for that silence and just be present. Don't drive off right away, or don't hop on your phone and, transition to something else. Give it a few moments or minutes to just soak in and give them silence to process, so that if they do have another question or something, stirs in them emotionally, they can then talk to that too. There's of course going to be the chance where they're processing on their own for the night or maybe a couple of days, and they come back to you later with more questions. And that's great. That just means that they trust you again, and that you responded well the first time to their big questions, because look, now they're coming back. Now they want to ask more because you responded to them. You gave them an answer. You validated them. You didn't make them feel silly for asking those questions, right? Okay. So we talked through, again, explaining these complex diagnoses to siblings and preparing for those tough situations like maybe end of life, and potentially what bereavement support might look like and be for those siblings, and how to respond to really big questions. So I was told that some of you may have experienced child life services already in a hospital setting with your family. And I know just from, again, my personal experience that we are typically short-staffed and limited bandwidth to do really in-depth services always for families, but that doesn't mean it's not available. And sometimes people just need to know what they can advocate for and who and how to ask for supports and services. So a lot of people don't necessarily know all of the things a child life specialist can provide and what our specialization is actually in and how we can support siblings in all of the other pieces to a complex diagnosis, because what the siblings, again, are experiencing and going through is valid and does need supports. And they, deserve the same type of open communication and emotional support and therapeutic support and time and investment. and they need it, quite frankly. So if your child and the siblings, if they're needing further support, or even your child who has a diagnosis is in need of support, there are ways you can access our services and ask for child life support if that is something of interest to you. If your child is currently or is ever hospitalized, the steps to seek and ask for child life support there is to ask for a consult to be placed to see a child life specialist. We are accountable and responsible to addressing consults. You could always go to, especially if you're in a pediatric specific healthcare facility or hospital, there is, in America, I should say, you are more than likely to have a child life program and therefore have some sort of play space or zone or playroom in that facility. And that's where you can find our staff too and come to us directly. You could also ask a social worker or nurse to contact the child life specialist. However, if you're not in the hospital and you're in an outpatient setting and you're going for a follow-up appointment or just an outpatient medical provider appointment in general, you could always ask the social worker to contact Child Life. Outpatient services and buildings don't always have us on staff or readily available 24/7. We might be more of an ad hoc service to them. So that is something that when you're on site at the appointment, you could potentially request for, and they might be able to accommodate. Or you can proactively request for it when you're booking that appointment and you're making the phone call to make that appointment. You can let them know ahead of time, hey, I really want to bring in brothers and sisters. They're having a lot of questions. I don't know how to respond, or, we're noticing behavioral changes. I would love for a professional to come work with the siblings. Can you ask for Child Life to be present during our appointment? That gives them, the scheduler and the staff, time to coordinate and contact us and to make sure, hopefully, that we're available to come in then. And then lastly, in the community, there's places like Hearts Connected, and there's even local private practice CCLSs that work independently that you can contact, reach out to, and continue to get that service that is maybe necessary for those other children and your family at large, even when you're not in a healthcare facility. And then the ACLP, that is our accrediting board. That it just stands for the Association of Child Life Professionals. You are more than welcome to go on their website. That's another great one-stop shop place for resources, information, how to support differing children, how to support siblings. And that's where you can also access information as to, finding a child life specialist near you, finding or locating supports and services that you might need. So with that being said, I want to be mindful of the time. I do want to leave time and the rest of this, the time we have today here, to potentially answer specific questions, whether they're scenario-based or just overview broad questions. I am open and happy to answer any questions I can. Also, I recognize that things may be personal, and this might not be a space that you feel comfortable doing so. So know that my contact information is there. And please, if you would rather have a conversation or talk further offline, know that that's available too for you.
Thank you so much, Caitlin, for offering that private space, because I know that, webinar, it's being recorded, and this is such a sensitive topic. So I really appreciate you sharing your information so that our families feel comfortable, reaching out and talking to you if it is something that's private. I just wanted to give a few minutes to allow anyone to please go ahead and you can submit questions in the Q&A box as well as in the chat box. We did have somebody ask about the resource that you mentioned, which is the Bereavement Hearts Connected webinar. So yes, if anyone missed that, we will definitely make sure that we get you that information. We'll share that in an email to everybody who participated tonight.
Perfect. I was going to say, I'm more than happy, Katie, right now, just to drop in. If here's the Hearts Connected website. For those here present right now, I recognize it's not helpful for people not currently in the chat, but here's our website, and on there you'll see links to resources and events, and that's where our webinars are posted, and that is where that information is in regards to that monthly free grief webinar that I was referring to.
And we have a question also about, I know you gave one great recommendation. I put it in the chat. We'll make sure that that gets included to all of our audience tonight as well. But one parent is asking about books that you would recommend for 3 to 5-year-old children dealing with anticipatory grief.
You know what? I'm just writing this down. So I actually have documents galore of specific books, and they're regarding anticipatory grief, grief after it's happened. And I even have them broken down by more specific, like this person was saying, age groups, because of course, a book that's going to work for a 3-year-old potentially is not appropriate to present to a 15-year-old, of course. So I'm wondering, Katie, if that's a resource maybe that I can make for you too, and you can distribute as you see fit, and that works for you guys. Would that work?
That would be great. I have that person's information as well, so we'll make sure that we get those resources directly to the person that just asked that. But we would love to work with you and be able to have that available for our families.
Perfect. Yeah, I have more than I can even say at this point. I have, like I said, I have a list of them. So I'm happy to provide that.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
I noticed when you were talking about the concrete language about the diagnosis, that we have a really rare, complex genetic diagnosis. And so I wondered if you had any tips at all about, when you have family members. I know we have extended family members here this evening as well, listening in. They can barely pronounce the diagnosis often. I know my own dad can't, he struggles, and a lot of people do, with how to pronounce it, let alone explain what this disease is. So how do we balance that using that concrete language and being upfront when we barely can explain it to the other adults they're asking questions, let alone children?
Right. That is a great question. So again, you as a caregiver, family member, a trusted adult, you are not expected to know everything there is to know about this complex diagnosis. It's not possible, and it's not even necessary. So I think the first step is letting go of that anxiety or stressor that you feel like, oh my gosh, I need to know all this. I need to Google all this information. Like, I don't know this part of it. I don't know how to explain this piece of it. Like, let that fear and stressor go, because your child doesn't need all that information either. If you as an adult don't have or need all the information, every little detail that like a doctor or specialist would know, your child surely doesn't need to know that either. And that's, again, we're taking the approach of asking your child questions first, and letting them lead the conversation tells you will tell you a lot more actually about, what specifically are they wanting to know? Because most kids, they're not, when they're asking about a diagnosis, they're not going to say something like, is that, like a 5-year-old is not going to be like, is that genetic or not? Does that involve the cells, and what is, like, right? They're not even thinking about those deeper level things. They're not thinking, is this, neurological? Is this, something like, is this orthopedic? Like, they're not thinking these big medical words. They're not even aware of what that means. And they're not aware of the complexities of it. So we don't need to make it complex for them. So when we say use concrete language, we're meaning, don't make up something. Don't make up what it's not. Don't minimize it though, and make it sound like it's no big deal. Like it's the average allergy or cold. I know I've worked with so many families who are so afraid to share a diagnosis, like, for example, cancer, to someone, that they would actually just make up, instead of just being honest and explaining, high level what it is, they actually made up it was something totally different. So imagine what that causes and what that does to a child now, and the misconceptions that they draw from that. So keep it surface level, keep it basic. What does that mean? That means that, this child doesn't talk the same way, doesn't have the same mobility. They might not be able to move the same way. They may be required to use certain technologies or wheelchairs or certain tools to help them navigate life. That might mean that they need a lot of mom and dad's attention and time, or grandma's time, or whomever's time, attention. This means that they're going to doctors often. This means that they need help with things that you as a sibling don't need help with, and talk through those specific things. Like, do you notice that I have to help brother eat and I have to feed him, but you don't need help anymore feeding and eating, right? That's because this disease is different, and it does something different to your brother's body, where someone like you who doesn't have this disease, you're able to do certain things on your own that your brother cannot do. You can make it specific to what they're seeing in real life, what they're seeing their brother or sister do, or what they're seeing their brother or sister can't do, and explain that that is a part of it. And that's why it is so complex. And that's why mommy or daddy or grandma or grandpa have to spend a lot of time supporting and helping them. Put a reasoning behind it, not just, brother is sick or sister is sick. That's why mom and daddy's with them. Here's why they need us. And here's why they need mommy in a different way than you need mommy for this reason.
Thank you so much for giving that incredible answer, because we actually had a question that was submitted ahead of time in advance that really you just answered and spoke to that, about how to be able to talk about why things are different. So I really appreciate you going into that detail and sharing and helping our families navigate those conversations. I do have another question about a teenage daughter who is approaching college age and has a lot of feelings of guilt moving out because she's been such a big helper. So is there any advice on how to talk to her about her feelings on this and helping her be able to not feel that guilt?
Katie, another great question, and another very common question and experience. In some ways, kids are very textbook with their processing, with their grief, with their developmental knowledge. And for a teen who has probably been extremely involved in their brother or sister's care and life, and now they're navigating this huge transition themselves as an individual to moving outside the home, that feeling of guilt is more common than not. And I would go so far as to guarantee that it's more than guilt too. There's a lot of pieces to that, right? So how I would recommend approaching this is, again, like I reiterated earlier, I would want to I wouldn't want to assume that it's guilt. I would want to give the time and space for that teenager to share and talk about it with you, and, ask them questions and make them feel comfortable, having this conversation, and make it a space where they feel like they can explain their feelings and fears and worry and guilt and anger and stressors. And again, validate those feelings. If it is guilt, or if it's guilt and fear, or whatever it might be, validate that is a normal response and a normal feeling, and it's okay to feel that way. So validate, provide comfort and reassurance. I think it's important that we can do a lot of comforting, but also ask your child, ask that teenager, do you want to go in problem solving mode? If they do, because there's some instances where at first conversation time, like the first time around, they might just need the comfort and validation and to feel heard, right? And that's where, again, you do follow up, right? But maybe during the first conversation, the very first time, you can move past comfort and get into problem solving mode. How can you maintain connection with your brother or sister once you move out, once you go away to college? Because, you have every right as an individual to live your life. We want you, and your brother wants, or your sister wants you to live your life and have a sense of normalcy, go to college, get a job, move out, whatever it is that you want to do for your life, you should be able to do. So you can say, do you want to talk with me and work through and talk through some options for staying connected and still having a role? Because that's a huge shift for a teenager to play a huge role and almost have a caregiver hat to some extent. They're behaving in a way as a sibling that their peers around them don't have to experience. And their home life is different from their peers. They wear a lot of hats, and they're probably extremely responsible, and they had to grow up really young, potentially. So talk to them about, how do you want to maintain connection and maintain, if you do, a sense of involvement? And what does that look like for you? What does that feel like for you? What does that sound like for you? Again, give them control, give them choices, give them that space to reflect and process and come up with responses. Or maybe that's something that they want to do on their own. And you just say, know that, mom or dad, whoever, know that we support you in whatever you decide. And we want to make this transition as best for you as possible. So if you want to take time to think about it and come back, we can talk again. Know that this is, an open floor, and we want to continue this conversation because we want to make sure your transition is as smooth as possible and as best as possible for you, because you've done so much for your family and for your brother or sister, and you deserve this for you too.
Thank you so much. We also had another, I'm sorry, did you have more to add to that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. We had someone actually comment and just say thank you so much. Their daughter's, really starting to ask a lot of hard questions, and the examples that you have given have just really been helpful to that family, and I'm sure many others. So thank you for being here. I hear you talk about creating space, and I appreciate you creating the space this evening with us, sharing your expertise with all of us. I just want to give another moment to make sure there's no other questions from our audience, and I appreciate all of them hanging there with us. I know we're a few minutes over, but it's such great conversation, and we just really appreciate you being here, having this space with us, sharing your information to be able to speak with others afterwards, making sure that everyone knows how to meet with a child life specialist and what you do and how important this profession is. Just really appreciate you being here. Appreciate Hearts Connected for partnering with us, and just really helping all of our families be able to navigate these challenging topics.
And you know what, Katie, I just want to add into, it was like divine intervention. I think earlier today, I was a guest, actually an attendee at a webinar, and it was a webinar where it was a panelist of siblings who are now adults, grown adults with jobs, careers, in college, whatever. And they all had a brother or sister who had a complex diagnosis. And some experienced bereavement and loss, and some have not. And some of their brothers and sisters are now healthy. But nonetheless, what I really, really loved and appreciated, and I even wrote it down because I was like, oh, I have to share this tonight. There was 3 things or themes that every single sibling echoed and said basically verbatim, and agreed to. And it was this idea of receiving and getting honest, transparent information from their parents and the importance of that. The second one was, I wrote it down, I don't want to make sure I don't change the words, was bringing them, quote, along in the journey and being involved to whatever extent they were able to be involved or were given option to be involved. And the third thing was given choices. So again, the 3 being honest and transparent with the information that they were provided by their parents or caregivers, being a part of the journey and being involved, and given choices. So this information that I share as, a professional and as a specialist, and what every other specialist would also share and echo what I've said tonight, is I think it's really important to know that this isn't just professionals saying these things or advising these approaches or steps or these sibling needs that, people might think we're just assuming or whatever. The reality is this is the real life input and feedback that siblings are providing. And they're saying later in life, this is what made a difference for them. Or if they didn't have that, that's what made it traumatic for them. And that is what made it hard for them. So I think that almost solidifies, if people are unsure about these approaches or this way to navigate, it hopefully serves as a solidification to, this is what siblings are saying. And this is what siblings are echoing, and it is consistent across the board.
That is fantastic information to share with us. So I thank you for that too. We actually at the GFPD launched our first ever SIB shops in 2022. And so we are, very big on making sure that the siblings are being supported, and you being here just really brings that home for us, and making sure that, the parents and all the extended family members really know how to support the children, no matter what their age are, whether they're a cousin, a sibling, just really making sure that we are taking the right steps. We're navigating this and being able to, ask the questions, answer correctly, support them, create the space, validate their feelings, all of what you've shared tonight. Thank you again so much. I didn't see any other questions come through, but I know we're going to have some follow-up with you. I'd love to create some resources, and then also share all of your bereavement webinars, the book recommendations that you made with all of our individuals who participated tonight. And there will be a survey for all of you still here. There's a survey at the end of this. If you could take a moment and complete that, we would appreciate your feedback. And again, Caitlin, thank you so much for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Katie, for having me. And thank you everyone who joined in and for sharing this space with me. I really appreciate you.